The blood-red sunset painted the rugged Arizona landscape, as Running Dove clutched the sacred turquoise amulet to her chest, her heart pounding with a decision that would forever change her destiny. She had never imagined sacrificing her tribe's most treasured possession for a white man, but as she stared across the ravine at the battered cowboy, bound for hanging at dawn, something stirred within her that transcended the ancient hostilities between their peoples. It was 1878, and the unforgiving desert surrounding Guthrie, Arizona Territory, had witnessed countless deaths between settlers and the Apache. But this particular death, this particular man Running Dove could not allow. Not after he had saved her brother from drowning in the flooded creek last spring, asking nothing in return, not even revealing his name to her people. Now fate had delivered him to her tribe as a prisoner, accused of stealing horses he didn't take. Running Dove's fingers trembled as she traced the intricate patterns carved into the ancient amulet. For generations, it had protected her ancestors, bringing rain during drought and healing during sickness. The tribal elders would banish her or worse if they discovered her plan, but the memory of the cowboy's kind eyes haunted her dreams each night since his capture 3 days ago. The Apache camp had grown quiet as dusk settled over the land. Only the occasional pop and crackle of campfires broke the silence. Running Dove moved silently through the shadows, her moccasins barely disturbing the desert sand. The path before her was clear. She would trade the most valuable treasure of her people for this stranger's life, then disappear into the night, branded a traitor but at peace with her conscience. What she hadn't planned on was what would happen after, or how this desperate act would ignite a love that neither the vast western frontier nor the deep-rooted hatred between their peoples could extinguish. Yates Garrison had given up hope. 3 days in Apache captivity had stripped away any illusion of rescue. The ropes binding his wrists behind him had rubbed his skin raw, and his parched throat burned from thirst. He had been given just enough water to keep him alive until morning, when Chief Black Horse had decreed he would die for stealing the tribe's prized horses, a crime Yates hadn't committed. The irony wasn't lost on him. After surviving 4 years fighting in the Civil War and another decade roaming the wild frontier, he was going to die because some actual horse thief had framed him. His only consolation was that he'd lived by his own code. He'd helped people when he could, worked honest jobs, and avoided the outlaw life that had claimed so many men he'd known. As night fully descended, Yates gazed up at the stars through the small opening in the thatched roof of his makeshift prison. The same stars that had guided him across countless trails would soon shine down on his lifeless body. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate, when a soft rustling sound made him snap to attention. A slender figure slipped through the doorway, a woman wrapped in a deerskin dress, adorned with intricate beadwork. In the dim moonlight filtering through the opening above, Yates recognized the Apache woman whose brother he had pulled from the rushing creek months ago. Her long black hair was tied back with a leather cord, and her dark eyes reflected the determination burning within. "You," he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "What are you doing here?" Running Dove pressed a finger to her lips, cautioning him to silence. She knelt beside him, a bone knife clutched in her hand. Yates tensed, uncertain of her intentions, but she quickly cut through his bindings. "Why?" he asked as he rubbed his raw wrists, bewildered by this unexpected turn of events. Running Dove extended her palm, revealing a turquoise amulet that seemed to glow with an inner light. "This is my people's greatest treasure," she said in careful English. "I trade it for your freedom." Yates stared at the beautiful artifact, understanding immediately the significance of her sacrifice. "I can't take that. Your people, my decision," she interrupted, her voice firm despite its softness. "You saved my brother, now I save you, but we must go now before the guard returns." "I'm Yates," he offered, realizing she didn't know his name. "Yates Garrison." "I am running dove of the Kairikahua Apache," she replied, the smallest hint of a smile touching her lips before urgency returned to her expression. "Come, there is little time." They slipped out of the crude prison into the velvet darkness of the desert night. Running Dove led him away from the camp with the sure-footed confidence of someone who knew every rock and cactus of the landscape. They moved in silence for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and the Apache encampment. When they reached a small arroyo cut deep into the earth by seasonal floods, Running Dove finally stopped. "Rest," she instructed, pointing to a protected alcove beneath an overhang. "Water." She handed him a deerskin pouch. Yates drank deeply, the lukewarm water tasting better than the finest whiskey. Only after his thirst was quenched did he speak. "They'll come after us at first light. They'll know you helped me." The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. "You can't go back." Running Dove's face betrayed no emotion as she placed the turquoise amulet in his palm. "This is yours now. It will protect you on your journey." Yates stared at the beautiful object, its weight far greater than its physical presence. "I can't take this." "It belongs to your people." "I made my choice," she said firmly. "The elders taught that this stone holds the sky and earth together. Now it will bind my debt to you." "There is no debt," Yates insisted, trying to return the amulet. "You risked everything to save me. If anything, I owe you." Running Dove pushed his hand back gently. "Keep it. It is done." Her eyes, dark as the night around them, met his with a certainty that brooked no argument. In that moment, Yates saw something in her gaze that made his heart skip a beat, of vulnerability beneath her strength, a question unasked. Before he could decipher its meaning, she looked away. "We must reach Guthrie before they find us," she said, rising to her feet. 2 days' journey if we are fast." "Why Guthrie?" Yates asked, standing as well, wincing as his stiff muscles protested the movement. "White man's law there." "Apache will not follow." She paused, something unspoken hovering between them. "And then our paths separate." The finality in her voice struck Yates like a physical blow, though he couldn't understand why. This woman was a stranger to him, their lives intersecting only by chance. Yet as they prepared to continue their journey through the night, he found himself reluctant to contemplate their eventual parting. Dawn broke with pink and gold fingers stretching across the eastern sky. Running Dove had pushed them hard through the night, stopping only when Yates' exhaustion became apparent. They had found shelter in a narrow ravine, hidden from view by towering rock formations weathered by centuries of wind and rain. As Yates stirred from his brief rest, he found Running Dove watching him, her expression unreadable. She had changed from her traditional Apache dress into simpler attire, a faded calico shirt and buckskin trousers that would draw less attention as they neared white settlements. Her transformation struck Yates as both practical and poignant, a visible sign of the worlds between which she traveled. "You slept long," she observed, handing him strips of dried meat. "Not long enough," he replied with a grimace, accepting the food gratefully. "But better than hanging." A ghost of a smile touched her lips before vanishing. "Eat. We go soon." As they ate in companionable silence, Yates studied her covertly. In the morning light, he noticed details he had missed in the darkness: the small scar near her temple, the graceful strength of her hands, the intelligence in her eyes that missed nothing. She was perhaps 22 or 23, younger than his 32 years, but there was an old wisdom about her that transcended age. "Why did you really help me?" he asked finally, the question that had been gnawing at him through the night. It wasn't just because I saved your brother." Running Dove considered his question, her gaze directed at the distant mountains. "My father was killed by white soldiers when I was a child," she said finally. "I was taught to hate all white men." She looked at him directly. "But hate is a heavy stone to carry. When you saved my brother and asked nothing, I saw that not all men are the same, just as not all Apache are the same." She touched the place where the amulet had hung around her neck for years. "The elders say the turquoise stone remembers all it sees. It has seen much blood between our peoples. I thought perhaps it should see something different." Her simple explanation moved Yates deeply. He reached into his pocket, feeling the smooth contours of the amulet she had given him. "Your people will never forgive you." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but I will forgive myself." They resumed their journey as the sun climbed higher, keeping to the shadows where possible, moving swiftly across open ground when necessary. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, the air shimmering above the baked earth. Yates noticed Running Dove's pace slowing, her breaths coming more rapidly. "We need to rest," he insisted, guiding her toward a lone cottonwood tree that offered meager shade. "No time," she protested, but allowed herself to be led to the shelter. "There's always time not to die from the heat," Yates countered, unstopping the water pouch. "Drink." As Running Dove took the water, their fingers brushed, and Yates felt an unexpected current pass between them. From her startled expression, she had felt it too. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spider silk. The crack of a distant rifle shattered the silence. Running Dove was on her feet instantly, her body tense with alarm. "Apache?" Yates asked, scanning the horizon. She shook her head. "Not Apache way, white men hunting, perhaps." But her wary expression suggested she wasn't convinced of her own explanation. "Or looking for me," Yates said grimly. "I told you I was accused of stealing horses. The real thieves might not appreciate me surviving to tell my side." Understanding dawned in Running Dove's eyes. "The horses taken from your people, they were not found with you." "No. I was camped nearby when your warriors found me. The tracks led in my direction, but I never saw the horses or the men who took them." Running Dove's expression darkened. "Then I have freed an innocent man, as I believed. But we face danger from both sides now." Another shot rang out, closer this time. Running Dove grabbed Yates' arm. "We must go. Different way." They abandoned the path they had been following and veered westward, away from the sounds of pursuit. The terrain grew rockier, more difficult to traverse, but offered better concealment. As they scrambled up a steep incline, loose stones clattered down behind them, and Yates turned to see Running Dove struggling to maintain her footing. He reached back to grasp her hand, pulling her up beside him. For a moment they stood close, their labored breaths mingling in the hot air between them. Yates became acutely aware of her hand in his, small but strong, and the trust implicit in her allowing him to help her. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his with an expression that made his heart beat faster. Before he could respond, the distinctive sound of hoofbeats reached their ears. Running Dove pulled him down behind a large boulder just as 3 riders appeared in the distance, moving slowly along the path they had abandoned. "Bartlett's men," Yates whispered, recognizing the lead rider's distinctive red bandana. "He's been trying to drive small ranchers off their land for months. Must have been his gang that stole those horses." Running Dove studied the men with narrowed eyes. "They want you dead." "Dead men tell no tales," Yates confirmed, "and they need someone to blame for their thieving." They remained motionless until the riders passed from view, then continued their westward trek, moving with greater urgency. The day wore on, the sun beating down mercilessly as they pushed themselves across the unforgiving landscape. By late afternoon, they had reached a series of shallow caves worn into a sandstone cliff. Running Dove led them to one that offered both shelter and a view of the surrounding terrain. "Rest now," she instructed, settling onto the sandy floor of the cave. "Night journey safer." Yates sank down gratefully, his muscles aching from the grueling pace. They shared the last of their water and meat, both aware that their supplies wouldn't last another day. "There's a creek about 5 miles west," Yates said, recalling his previous travels through the region. "If we reach it by morning, we can refill the water pouches and maybe catch some fish." Running Dove nodded approval. "You know this land well." "I've been wandering it for 10 years, Yates replied, never staying anywhere too long. "Why?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Yates was silent for a moment, surprised by her interest and his own willingness to answer. "After the war, the fighting between the northern and southern whites, I couldn't settle. Too many ghosts." He shrugged, uncomfortable with revealing so much. "What about you?" "Have you always been with your people?" A shadow crossed Running Dove's face. "Until I was 12. Then soldiers came to take Apache children to school to make us like white people." Her voice hardened. 3 years I was there. Cut my hair, changed my name to Rebecca, beat me when I spoke Apache tongue." Yates felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "How did you get back to your tribe?" "I ran away, found my way home." A hint of pride colored her voice. "My mother had died while I was gone. My father already dead in fighting. Only my brother remained." The simple tragedy of her story struck Yates deeply. Here was a woman who had lost everything but her dignity and her determination. Yet instead of hatred, she had chosen to save him, a white man, at great cost to herself. "I'm sorry," he said inadequately, wishing for better words. Running Dove's expression softened. "The past is like tracks in sand. Wind comes, they disappear. Only the journey ahead matters now." As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land, they sat in companionable silence. Yates found himself stealing glances at Running Dove, admiring the proud tilt of her chin, the quiet strength in her bearing. When she caught him looking, he didn't look away, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of growing connection that neither had anticipated. The moment was broken by distant shouts, multiple voices carrying on the evening air. Running Dove moved to the cave entrance, her body tense. "Many men, coming this way." Yates joined her, squinting into the gathering dusk. He could make out a group of riders approaching from the east, at least 6 men, moving purposefully. "Bartlett's brought reinforcements," he muttered. "They're tracking us." Running Dove's expression remained calm, but Yates saw the concern in her eyes. "They will find us here." "Then we don't stay here," Yates decided. "Night's coming. We can use the darkness." They gathered their meager possessions quickly. As Running Dove tied her small bundle to her waist, Yates noticed for the first time a delicate silver bracelet on her wrist, incongruous with the rest of her practical attire. "That's pretty," he commented, nodding toward the jewelry. Running Dove touched it briefly, a fleeting sadness in her expression. "My mother's. All I have of her now." The simple statement hit Yates like a physical blow. The amulet she had given him, the tribe's treasure, might have been her only other connection to her past, her heritage. The magnitude of her sacrifice struck him anew. "We'll find a way through this," he promised her, a sudden fierce protectiveness welling up inside him. "Together." She looked at him, surprise and something warmer flickering in her dark eyes. "Together," she echoed, the word a commitment. They slipped out of the cave as twilight deepened, keeping low and using the rocky terrain for cover. The riders were still a half-mile distant, but gaining steadily. Yates led them along a narrow ridge, hoping to circle behind their pursuers and double back toward the creek he had mentioned. The gambit might have worked had the moon not emerged from behind a cloud, bathing the landscape in silver light. A shout went up from the nearest rider, and suddenly, gunshots were peppering the rocks around them. "Run!" Yates shouted, pushing Running Dove ahead of him as they abandoned stealth for speed. They raced down the far side of the ridge, loose stones cascading around them as bullets whined overhead. At the bottom of the slope, Running Dove stumbled, falling to her knees with a suppressed cry of pain. Yates was at her side instantly, helping her up, noticing her wince as she put weight on her right ankle. "I can walk," she insisted, though her face was drawn with pain. "Not fast enough," Yates countered, making a swift decision. He swept her into his arms, ignoring her protests, and continued running. The sound of pursuit grew louder as the riders found a way down the ridge. Yates' lungs burned with exertion, but he pushed on, driven by determination to keep Running Dove safe. He could feel her heart racing against his chest, her breath warm against his neck. Ahead, the terrain dropped away suddenly into a deep arroyo, a natural defensive position. Yates made for it, sliding down the steep embankment with Running Dove still in his arms. At the bottom, he set her down gently against the earthen wall. "Stay here," he instructed, drawing his revolver. "I'll hold them off." Running Dove caught his arm, her eyes fierce in the moonlight. "We fight together or not at all." Before Yates could argue, the first rider appeared at the edge of the arroyo. Yates fired, his shot going wide but causing the man to duck back. More shots followed from above, sending dirt and stone fragments flying around them. Running Dove pulled a small knife from her boot. It seemed pitifully inadequate against guns, but her determination was unwavering. They pressed themselves against the arroyo wall, using the shadows for what little protection they offered. "You can't outrun or outfight us, Garrison." A voice called down Bartlett himself, Yates realized. "Give yourself up and maybe the squaw gets to live." Running Dove tensed beside him, her grip on the knife tightening. Yates knew Bartlett's promise was worthless. Neither of them would survive if they surrendered. "I've got 3 bullets left," Yates whispered to her. "Not enough." Running Dove's expression was calm, accepting. "Then we make them count." The simple courage in her voice stirred something profound in Yates. He had faced death many times before, but never had he felt such regret at the prospect, not for himself, but for the lost possibility of whatever might have grown between them given time. Acting on impulse, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the turquoise amulet. "Take this back," he said, pressing it into her hand. "It's your heritage, not mine." Running Dove closed her fingers around the stone, then, to his surprise, looped the leather cord around both their wrists, binding them together. "If we die," she said softly, "we die as one." The intimacy of the gesture, the depth of meaning behind it, left Yates momentarily speechless. In her eyes, he saw not fear but a fierce certainty, as if in these final moments she had found something worth more than survival. Above them, Bartlett was growing impatient. "Last chance, Garrison. We're coming down after you." Yates met Running Dove's gaze one last time, wishing for more time, more words, more everything. Then he raised his revolver, prepared to sell their lives dearly. The night exploded with gunfire, but not from Bartlett's men. From somewhere to the west came a fusillade of shots, followed by shouts of alarm from the ridge above. Yates and Running Dove pressed deeper into the shadows, uncertain of this new development. The thundering of hooves suggested Bartlett's men were retreating or being pursued. More shots rang out, then gradually silence fell. "Who?" Running Dove whispered, her body tense beside Yates. "Don't know," he replied, keeping his revolver ready. "Could be lawmen from Guthrie, could be Apache." They waited, breath held, as footsteps approached the edge of the arroyo. A figure appeared in silhouette against the night sky. "Yates Garrison, you still breathing down there?" The voice was familiar, gruff, with a hint of Texas drawl. Yates felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Reuben, Reuben Hayes, the very same," came the amused response. "Figured you might need some help when I heard Bartlett boasting in town about fixing your wagon permanent-like." Reuben Hayes had been Yates' partner on cattle drives years ago, before settling in Guthrie as a deputy marshal. Their friendship had endured despite infrequent contact. "Got about a dozen deputies with me," Reuben continued. "Bartlett's gang scattered like quail, but we winged a couple. They won't be bothering you tonight." Yates looked at Running Dove, seeing the wariness in her expression. "He's a friend," he assured her. "One of the few good lawmen in these parts." She nodded, but remained tense as they climbed up from the arroyo, the amulet still binding them together. Yates noticed she favored her injured ankle, and without asking permission, he swept her into his arms again for the steep ascent. At the top, they were met by Reuben and several other men on horseback. Reuben's weathered face registered surprise at the sight of Running Dove in Yates' arms, but to his credit, he made no comment. "You're a sight for sore eyes, Reuben," Yates said, carefully setting Running Dove on her feet but keeping a supportive arm around her waist. "Likewise," Reuben replied. "Though you look like you've been dragged through hell backward, both of you." His gaze lingered curiously on Running Dove, who met his scrutiny with dignified silence. "It's a long story," Yates said. "One best told somewhere safer than this." Reuben nodded. "We've got horses. Guthrie's about 5 hours' ride from here. We can make it by dawn." As the other lawmen prepared to depart, Reuben pulled Yates aside. "Your Apache friend going to be a problem in town?" he asked quietly. "Sentiments aren't exactly friendly these days." Yates' protective instincts flared. "She saved my life, Reuben, more than once. Anyone has a problem with her, they'll answer to me." Reuben studied him thoughtfully. "Must be some story," he said finally. "Don't worry, I'll make sure she's treated proper." He glanced at Running Dove, who was untying the amulet from their wrists with careful movements. "She your woman now?" The question caught Yates off guard. His relationship with Running Dove defied simple categorization, forged in danger, deepened by shared struggle, tinged with an attraction neither had openly acknowledged. "It's complicated," he admitted. Reuben's weathered face cracked into a knowing smile. "Ain't it always?" They rode through the night, Running Dove sharing Yates' horse, her back pressed against his chest as they followed Reuben's party toward Guthrie. Despite the circumstances, Yates found himself acutely aware of her warmth, the subtle scent of sage that clung to her hair, the trust implied by her allowing him this proximity. "You are quiet," she observed after they had ridden for some time. "Thinking," Yates replied. "About what comes next." The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. What did come next? Running Dove had sacrificed everything to save him. She couldn't return to her people. And Yates, a drifter by nature, suddenly found himself contemplating something he hadn't considered in years, staying in one place, with her. "Yes," he admitted, "though I'm not sure what that looks like yet." Running Dove was silent for a moment. "For Apache, the future is like distant mountains. We know they are there, but cannot see every rock and tree until we come closer." Yates smiled at the wisdom in her words. "We'll figure it out together," he promised, tightening his arm slightly around her waist. "One step at a time." He felt rather than saw her smile. "Together," she agreed, the word carrying the weight of a vow. As promised, they reached Guthrie as dawn was breaking, the small frontier town coming to life as they rode down its main street. Running Dove tensed visibly as curious faces turned their way, some openly hostile at the sight of an Apache woman. Reuben led them to the marshal's office, a sturdy wooden building at the center of town. "You can rest here while I sort things out with the circuit judge about Bartlett," he told Yates. "Might take a day or two, but we got enough evidence to put him away for those horse thefts." Inside, Reuben showed them to a small back room with a cot and wash basin. "Not exactly the Palmer house, but it's private," he said. "I'll have the doc look at that ankle," he added, nodding toward Running Dove, who had maintained stoic silence despite her obvious pain. When they were alone, Running Dove sank onto the cot with visible relief. "Your friend Reuben, he is a good man, one of the best," Yates assured her, pouring water into the basin and finding a clean cloth. "Here, let me see your ankle." She hesitated, then extended her leg, allowing him to remove her moccasin and examine the swollen joint. His touch was gentle as he bathed away the dirt and blood, revealing a nasty sprain but no break. "You need rest," he told her, "and food. I'll see what I can find." Running Dove caught his hand as he rose. "Do not go far," she said, a rare vulnerability in her voice. "I'll be right outside the door," he promised, squeezing her hand before reluctantly releasing it. In the main office, Reuben was waiting, a knowing expression on his weathered face. "She's something special, isn't she?" he observed. Yates couldn't deny it. "More than I can explain." Reuben pushed a cup of coffee toward him. "Try anyway. Got a feeling this story's worth hearing." So Yates told him everything: the false accusation of horse theft, his capture by the Apache, Running Dove's sacrifice of her tribe's treasure to free him, their desperate flight across the desert pursued by both Apache warriors and Bartlett's gang. Reuben whistled softly when Yates finished. "And here I thought my life was exciting." He studied Yates thoughtfully. "What happens now? For her, I mean. Can't imagine she's planning to go back to her people." The question echoed Yates' own uncertainty. "I don't know," he admitted. "She can't go back, they'd kill her for helping me. But staying here." He glanced around the marshal's office, aware of the town beyond its walls and the prejudices that permeated it. "This won't be easy for her either." "Nothing worth having ever is," Reuben observed. "But I've known you a long time, Yates. Never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her." Yates couldn't argue with that assessment. In just days, Running Dove had become essential to him in ways he was still struggling to understand. Her courage, her wisdom, her quiet strength, they called to something deep within him, awakening feelings he had thought long buried. "I can't ask her to stay," he said finally. "Not if it means facing hatred every day. She's lost too much already." "Maybe let her decide that," Reuben suggested. "Women have a way of knowing what they want, and if it's you she wants, well." He shrugged. "You might be surprised what she's willing to face for that." The thought was both humbling and terrifying. Yates had never considered himself worthy of such devotion, yet Running Dove had already risked everything for him once. "Get some food and rest," Reuben advised. "Things will look clearer after." Yates returned to the back room with bread, cheese, and more coffee. He found Running Dove standing at the small window, looking out at the town with an unreadable expression. "Strange place," she commented as he set the food down. "So many people living so close together." "It takes some getting used to," Yates agreed, remembering his own initial discomfort with town life after years on the open range. They ate in companionable silence, both exhausted from their ordeal yet somehow reluctant to surrender to sleep, while so much remained unspoken between them. Finally, Running Dove set aside her empty cup and turned to face him directly. "What happens now, Yates Garrison?" she asked, echoing Reuben's earlier question. Yates met her gaze steadily. "What do you want to happen?" She considered this, her dark eyes thoughtful. "I cannot return to my people. That path is closed to me now." She touched the turquoise amulet which she had reclaimed from their impromptu binding. but I do not regret my choice. You could go anywhere, Yates said softly. Start fresh where no one knows you're Apache, California maybe, or north to Colorado. Alone. She asked, the single word carrying layers of meaning. Yates swallowed hard, his heart pounding. Not necessarily. Running Dove moved closer to him, her proximity making it difficult for him to think clearly. When I gave you this, she said, holding up the amulet, I traded my tribe's treasure for your life, but now. She hesitated, uncharacteristic uncertainty in her expression. Now I ask something else. What? Yates asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I ask you to treasure me instead. The words were simple, direct, yet filled with such vulnerability that Yates felt his throat tighten with emotion. Without hesitation, he reached for her, drawing her into his arms with a gentleness that belied the intensity of his feelings. I already do, he murmured against her hair. More than you know. Running Dove lifted her face to his, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Then we find our path together. When their lips met, it felt to Yates like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Her kiss was tentative at first, then increasingly confident as he responded with barely restrained passion. In that moment, all the barriers between them, race, culture, history, seemed to dissolve, leaving only the undeniable truth of what they had found in each other. When they finally parted, breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. Together, he affirmed, making the word a promise. Running Dove smiled, the expression transforming her face with a radiance that took his breath away. Together, she echoed, sealing their pact. The following days passed in a blur of activity. Reuben arranged for a circuit judge to hear the evidence against Bartlett, who had been captured trying to flee to Mexico. 2 of his men turned state's evidence, confirming that Bartlett had orchestrated the horse theft and framed Yates to eliminate a potential witness to his other criminal activities. Throughout the proceedings, Running Dove remained largely sequestered in the marshal's office, venturing out only with Yates at her side. The townsfolk's reactions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility, but Yates' protective presence and Reuben's official support kept confrontations to a minimum. On the evening after Bartlett's sentencing 20 years in territorial prison, Yates found Running Dove packing her few possessions in the small room that had become their temporary sanctuary. "What are you doing?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. "Preparing," she replied simply. "It is time to move on, yes." Yates hesitated, torn between his instinct to keep wandering and his newfound desire for something more permanent with her. "I've been thinking about that," he said slowly. "Reuben mentioned there's a small ranch for sale about 10 miles west of here. Nothing fancy, a cabin, some decent grazing land, a stream running through it." Running Dove paused in her packing, studying him with those perceptive dark eyes. "You wish to buy this ranch?" "I've saved most of my earnings over the years," Yates admitted. "Never had a reason to spend them. Never had a reason to settle down." He took her hands in his. "Until now." The hope that blossomed in Running Dove's expression made his heart swell. "You would stay in one place. For me, with you," he corrected gently. "If that's what you want. We could build something together, Running Dove. Something that's ours." She considered his words, her thumbs tracing circles on the backs of his hands. "The people here, they do not all welcome me." "Some will," Yates acknowledged honestly. "Others won't, at least not at first, but we'll face that together, and over time." He shrugged. "People change when they get to know each other." Running Dove's smile was slow but radiant. "I would like to see this ranch." The next morning they rode out with Reuben to inspect the property. The previous owner had died without heirs, leaving the small spread abandoned for nearly a year. The cabin was sturdy if weathered, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. A creek meandered through the property, lined with cottonwoods and willows. The surrounding land offered good grazing, with mountains visible in the distance. As they walked the boundaries, Running Dove grew increasingly animated, pointing out medicinal plants, signs of game, places where the soil would support gardens. Yates watched her, enchanted by her connection to the land and her vision for what it could become. "This place speaks to you," he observed as they paused by the creek. She nodded, trailing her fingers in the clear water. "It feels—" She searched for the right word. "It feels like it could be home." The simple statement filled Yates with profound joy. Home. Something he hadn't had since childhood, something he had convinced himself he didn't need. Now the prospect of creating one with Running Dove seemed not just possible but essential. "Then it's settled," he declared. "I'll make an offer today." Reuben, who had been tactfully keeping his distance, rejoined them with a knowing smile. "Looks like you've made your decision," he commented. "Can't say I'm surprised." "There's just one more thing," Yates said, suddenly serious. He turned to Running Dove, taking both her hands in his. "If we're going to do this, build a life together, I want to do it right." He dropped to one knee, oblivious to Reuben's startled chuckle. "Running Dove, will you marry me?" Her eyes widened in surprise, then softened with emotion. "This is the white way of asking to be together forever." "It is," Yates confirmed, his heart pounding as he awaited her answer. "Then yes," she said simply. "I will marry you, Yates Garrison." Reuben's applause broke the moment, but couldn't diminish the joy that surged through Yates as he rose to his feet and gathered Running Dove in his arms. Their kiss was brief, but filled with promise of challenges overcome, of a future shared, of love that had defied all odds to find its way. 2 weeks later, they were married in a simple ceremony performed by the same circuit judge who had sentenced Bartlett. Reuben stood as Yates' best man, while the doctor's wife, Martha, who had taken a liking to Running Dove, attended her. The gathering was small, just a handful of townsfolk who had come to accept, if not fully understand, the unusual couple. Running Dove wore a dress of pale blue calico, her hair adorned with small white flowers. Around her neck hung the turquoise amulet, returned to its rightful owner but now symbolizing not just her heritage but their shared journey. Yates could barely take his eyes off her, scarcely believing that this extraordinary woman had chosen to bind her life to his. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, the small audience applauded politely. But it was the private moment afterward, when Yates and Running Dove stood alone on the steps of the courthouse, that truly marked the beginning of their union. "My people have no word for wife," Running Dove told him softly. "The closest meaning is she who walks beside him. That is what I will be, your companion on the path, whatever comes." Yates lifted her hand to his lips. "And I'll be yours," he promised, "every step of the way." They moved to the ranch the following day, bringing their few possessions and supplies purchased with Yates' savings. The cabin required work, new chinking between the logs, repairs to the roof, a proper bed to replace the crude pallet left by the previous owner. But with each improvement, it became more truly theirs. Running Dove proved as adept at creating a home as she had been at survival in the wild. She fashioned curtains from fabric bought in town, planted herbs and vegetables in the fertile soil near the creek, and decorated the cabin's interior with weavings and pottery she crafted herself. Yates watched her transformation from wary fugitive to confident homemaker with awe and deepening love. For his part, Yates threw himself into the physical labor of restoring the ranch. He repaired fences, built a small barn, and with Reuben's help, purchased a modest herd of cattle to graze the land. The work was exhausting but satisfying, giving him a sense of purpose and permanence he had never expected to embrace. Their evenings were spent by the fireplace, talking, planning, learning each other's stories and dreams. Running Dove taught Yates words in her language, laughing at his awkward pronunciation, but appreciating his sincere efforts. In turn, he shared books with her, reading aloud from volumes of poetry and adventure tales that had been his companions on lonely trails. Physical intimacy developed naturally between them, tentative at first, then increasingly passionate as trust and understanding deepened. Yates marveled at the gift of Running Dove's love, expressed not just in her willing body but in the thousand small ways she showed her care: a wildflower left by his plate, a cooling cloth for his brow after a day in the sun, the way she listened when he spoke of the ghosts that sometimes haunted his dreams. As summer turned to fall and then to winter, their bond strengthened through shared challenges. Not all of these came from the land or the elements. Despite Reuben's protective influence, they encountered prejudice when they ventured into town: sideways glances, whispered comments, occasional refusal of service. Running Dove weathered these slights with dignified indifference, but Yates saw the hurt they caused her. "We don't have to go to town," he told her after a particularly unpleasant encounter at the general store. "I can handle the business alone." "No," she replied firmly. "If we hide, nothing changes." "Besides," she added with a small smile, "for every person who turns away, there is another who offers friendship." She was right. Gradually, a small circle of allies formed around them: Martha and her husband, the blacksmith's family, the young schoolteacher who asked Running Dove to share Apache stories with her pupils. These connections enriched their life together, providing community without compromising their cherished privacy. Winter brought heavy snow and long evenings confined to the cabin, which now boasted a second room Yates had built as a surprise for Running Dove. "For the future," he had said simply when she questioned the addition, leaving unspoken the hope they both harbored for children someday. It was during one such snowy evening, as they sat before the fire sharing a simple meal, that Running Dove made an announcement that changed everything. "I carry your child," she said without preamble, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. Yates froze mid-bite, his heart performing a complicated maneuver in his chest. "You're certain?" she nodded, a mixture of joy and apprehension in her eyes. "2 moons have passed without my woman's time, and I feel the changes in my body." Setting aside his plate, Yates moved to kneel before her, placing his large hand over hers. "A baby," he whispered, awe and terror competing in his voice. "Our baby." Running Dove studied his face anxiously. "You are happy." "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Yates assured her, gathering her into his arms. "Terrified, yes. Overwhelmed, definitely, but mostly." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "Mostly just grateful for you, for this life we're building, for everything." As he held her close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, Yates thought about the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From prisoner and savior to husband and wife, from strangers to soul-deep companions, it seemed impossible that only months had passed since their paths first crossed. The winter months saw Running Dove's body changing as their child grew within her. Yates watched in wonder as her slender form softened and rounded, her movements becoming more deliberate, her connection to the new life evident in the way she often paused to rest her hands on her swelling belly. They prepared for the baby's arrival with practical thoroughness, Yates building a cradle from cottonwood branches, Running Dove sewing tiny garments from soft flannel. Martha visited regularly, bringing advice and reassurance based on her experience helping deliver the town's babies. "You're doing beautifully," she told Running Dove during one such visit in early spring. "Strong and healthy, just like this little one will be." When Martha had gone, Running Dove confided a fear to Yates that she had kept hidden. What if the child faces hatred for being of two worlds? Not fully Apache, not fully white. Yates considered her words carefully, understanding the depth of her concern. "Our child will face challenges," he acknowledged. "But they'll also have something precious, the wisdom of two cultures, the strength that comes from being a bridge between different worlds." He placed his hand on her rounded stomach, feeling the baby kick against his palm. "And they'll know they're loved, completely and without condition. That's the foundation everything else is built on." Running Dove covered his hand with hers, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You have become wise, Yates Garrison," she teased gently. "I had a good teacher," he replied, kissing her forehead. The baby arrived on a perfect June morning, heralded by a sunrise that painted the sky in spectacular hues of pink and gold. Martha had come the previous evening when Running Dove's labor began, bringing her medical bag and calm efficiency. After hours of steadfast endurance that left Yates in awe of his wife's strength, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to proclaim his readiness for whatever life might bring. He had Yates' strong build and Running Dove's copper skin, a perfect blend of both parents. "He's magnificent," Yates whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with cautious hands. "What shall we call him?" Running Dove, exhausted but radiant, considered the question. "In my people's tradition, a child is not named immediately. We wait to see what spirit they reveal." She touched the baby's downy head. "But I think he should have two names, one from my heritage, one from yours." They decided on Thomas, after Yates' father, with the Apache name Tarak, meaning one who is alert, to be bestowed when his nature became more apparent. Young Thomas thrived under their devoted care, growing from a curious infant into an active toddler with remarkable speed. He had his mother's watchful intelligence and his father's determined spirit, a combination that kept both parents constantly on their toes. As the ranch prospered under Yates' careful management, their life together settled into a rhythm of satisfying work and simple pleasures. Running Dove expanded her garden, experimenting with traditional Apache healing plants alongside vegetables for their table. Yates increased their cattle herd gradually, hiring occasional help from town for the busier seasons. Word of the white rancher with the Apache wife spread through the territory, bringing occasional curiosity seekers to their door. Some came with genuine interest, others with less benign motives. Yates and Running Dove learned to distinguish between the two, welcoming the former with cautious hospitality while firmly turning away the latter. Among their more unusual visitors was a professor from back east, researching Native American cultures for a book. Initially skeptical, Running Dove was won over by his sincere desire to understand rather than merely document. She shared selected stories and traditions, careful to protect sacred knowledge while helping correct misconceptions. "Why did you decide to trust him?" Yates asked after the professor had departed with pages of notes and sketches. "Because he listened more than he spoke," Running Dove replied thoughtfully. "And because the future Thomas faces will be easier if more people understand instead of fear." Her wisdom reminded Yates yet again of how fortunate he was to have found her. Their partnership had evolved into something richer and deeper than he had ever imagined possible, a true meeting of minds and hearts that transcended the boundaries others tried to impose. That autumn, as Thomas approached his second birthday, Running Dove made another announcement that brought joy to their expanding family. "Another child grows within me," she told Yates one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch of their now expanded cabin. Thomas was playing at their feet with wooden animals Yates had carved for him, blissfully unaware of the momentous news. Yates gathered Running Dove close, his heart full to overflowing. "I'm the most fortunate man alive," he murmured against her hair. Running Dove's smile held a hint of mischief. "Yes," she agreed, "you are." Their daughter arrived the following spring, a delicate beauty with Running Dove's fine features, and surprisingly, a dusting of reddish hair that Yates' mother had possessed. They named her Sarah after Yates' grandmother, with the Apache name Noya, Spirit Walker, to honor her mixed heritage. As their family grew, so did their connections to the community. The prejudice they had initially encountered gradually gave way to acceptance, if not always complete understanding. Thomas started attending the town school when he turned 6, facing some early difficulties, but ultimately winning respect for his quick mind and unfailing politeness. "The teacher says I'm the best reader in the class," he announced proudly one evening, his dark eyes so like his mother's shining with accomplishment. "That's because your mama reads to you every night," Yates told him, ruffling his straight black hair affectionately. "And because you listen well," Running Dove added, balancing 4-year-old Sarah on her hip. "A good mind needs both knowledge and wisdom to truly grow." Their children flourished in the unique environment created by their parents' union, learning to rope and ride from Yates, absorbing plant lore and Apache stories from Running Dove, developing a natural confidence in navigating between cultures that would serve them well throughout their lives. The ranch prospered too, expanding gradually as Yates acquired adjacent land from neighbors who moved on. They built a larger home to replace the original cabin, though they kept the first structure standing as a reminder of their beginnings. Running Dove's gardens became locally famous, producing not only food for their table but healing remedies sought after by townsfolk, who had come to respect her knowledge. 10 years after their marriage, Reuben, now the full marshal of Guthrie, brought news that changed their perspective on the past. "Thought you should know," he told them during a Sunday visit. "Got word that Chief Black Horse died last month. His son leads the band now." Running Dove received the news with characteristic composure, though Yates saw the flicker of old pain in her eyes. Black Horse had been the one who decreed Yates' execution and would have surely ordered Running Dove's death for betraying the tribe. "His son is called Tall Feather," she said quietly. "He was a kind boy, less harsh than his father." The information proved significant when, 3 weeks later, a small party of Apache appeared at the ranch's boundary. Yates spotted them first while checking fence lines and rode back to warn Running Dove, his heart pounding with old fears. "Stay inside with the children," he instructed, reaching for the rifle he seldom carried anymore. Running Dove shook her head firmly. "No, if they have come for me after all these years, I will face them standing, not hiding." Her expression softened as she touched his arm. "But I do not think that is why they are here." She was right. The Apache party, led by a tall warrior Yates assumed was Tall Feather, approached with signs of peaceful intent. Running Dove went out to meet them, her back straight, her step unhesitating. Yates followed a pace behind, rifle lowered but ready. The conversation that followed was conducted in the Apache language, leaving Yates to interpret through gestures and tones what he could not understand in words. There seemed to be no hostility in the exchange, though Running Dove's posture remained tense until something Tall Feather said caused her to relax visibly. When the visitors departed an hour later, Running Dove watched them go with an expression Yates couldn't quite read, part relief, part melancholy, part something like closure. "What happened?" he asked gently when they were alone. Tall Feather brought news and forgiveness, she explained, wonder in her voice. "My brother lives. He has been trying to find me for years." Her eyes filled with tears. And the new council has lifted the banishment placed upon me. I am welcome to visit the tribe, though my home remains here." The significance of this reconciliation was not lost on Yates. For 10 years, Running Dove had lived with the knowledge that she had sacrificed her entire past for their future together. Now, a piece of that past had been restored to her. "Will you go?" he asked, prepared to support whatever she decided. "Yes," she said after consideration. "Not to stay, but to see my brother, to show him our children." She looked up at Yates, her expression serene. "To tell him I found the right path, though it was not the one I was born to walk." The visit happened that autumn, a journey of healing that brought Running Dove full circle. She returned with a renewed connection to her heritage, but also with absolute certainty about her chosen life. "My brother asked if I regretted my choice," she told Yates as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, the children sleeping soundly down the hall. "I showed him the amulet." She touched the turquoise stone that still hung at her neck. "I told him that some treasures are worth more than others, that what I found with you was beyond price." Yates gathered her close, overwhelmed anew by the gift of her love. "I promise to treasure you," he whispered against her hair. "Every day I try to be worthy of that trust." Running Dove lifted her face to his, the years having only enhanced her beauty. "You are," she assured him. "You always have been." As they sealed this renewal of their commitment with a kiss, Yates reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperate flight across the desert to the peaceful sanctuary they had built together. From strangers divided by circumstance to partners united by choice, their story had defied all expectations, including their own. The turquoise amulet that had once been her tribe's greatest treasure now represented something far more valuable: the courage to choose love over tradition, to forge a path where none had existed before, to build a life that honored both their pasts while creating something entirely new. In the years that followed, they watched their children grow into remarkable adults, Thomas following his father into ranching while Sarah, to everyone's surprise, went east to study medicine, combining Western scientific knowledge with her mother's traditional healing wisdom. They welcomed grandchildren, expanded their holdings, and became respected elders in a community that had long since forgotten to see them as anything other than simply Yates and Running Dove Garrison. And through it all, they remained what they had promised to be on that long-ago day when an Apache woman traded her tribe's treasure for a cowboy's freedom, then asked him to treasure her instead, companions walking side by side on a shared path. Their love, a beacon guiding them home through all of life's changing seasons.